Welcome everyone to today's event coach training for Crime Busters. My name is Kathleen and I am the event supervisor. Welcome today again. And for question and answer, this presentation is set up where there will be actually exercises in which people can go through together, as well as after each section, I will open the floor to any questions. So please wait until those slides that ask, do you have questions on this section, to ask questions. I'll also be taking questions at the end. So thank you, and let's get started. So this whole event, Crime Busters, it's based around this fictional crime scene, and it's the students' objective to determine who committed the crime using evidence found at the crime scene. So the students are like part of a forensic unit where they use different clues and evidence found at a fictional crime scene to solve who did the crime. And an overview of this event, the official tournament is Saturday, May 10th, 2025, and team sizes are 1 or 2 students per team, and this event lasts 30 minutes. And there are different kinds of evidence that are found at this event. So there are 6 parts or 6 types of evidence that the students will encounter. The first is powders, where they are given a set of powders and they have to find the identity of each powder. There's also ink samples that they have to analyze to figure out whose ink sample belongs to the one found at the crime scene. Also, there are different kinds of prints that will be given to the students where they have to match to those found at the crime scene. And there's also unspecified evidence that's our wild card here. So it'll vary year to year and event to event. I'll go through all these parts in greater detail as we go through this presentation. And there are 5 different suspects that the students can choose from, and they can either implicate 1 or 2 suspects. So I'll go through this in greater detail later. There are many different test materials provided to the students at the event. So there's a list of possible powders that the students can encounter. There will also be 3 types of liquids: tap water, vinegar, and iodine solution. They'll be given tiny plastic cups, wooden spoons and toothpicks, black paper, a chromatogram that will be provided by me, as well as rubbing alcohol, the prints packet containing the 3 different kinds of prints, and the exam sheet and zip grade form that I use to assess how your students do at this event. So the exam sheet, it's front and back, it's one sheet, and I ask that the students fill out their name and school on both sides just for ease of sorting. There is at least a team number printed, I believe, on the exam sheet, but this just helps with organization and making sure that the scores get to your students as fast as possible. And there are different sections. So there's the powder identification section, which they'll need to fill out. There's also a section prompting them to do chromatography. Then the zip grade questions will be printed on the back of the exam sheet, and tiebreaker questions will also be printed on the back. This format will be seen for both the practice tournaments as well as the actual tournament in May. As for the zip grade, this is a separate sheet. So we have one sheet for the exam with the questions, and then one sheet for the zip grade where students will bubble in the answers to the questions on the zip grade portion of the exam. And please make sure that your students know to fill out each of these questions in the zip grade, because they will lose out on points if this is turned in blank. For the zip grade, the name, quiz, class, and student ID, the categories don't really matter actually. It's really their school name, the event name, if it's our practice or actual tournament, and their team number. These will be filled out by John. Thank you. So you don't need to worry about your students filling that out. And as I've said before, both the exam sheet as well as the zip grade will be graded. So just make sure your students fill out the powder identification portion of the exam sheet, as well as answer tiebreakers if they have time to do that. They're not going to be marked down if the tiebreaker answers are wrong. It's in their best interest to do that in case there's a tie. So make sure that they're aware they can fill out both portions of the exam sheet, and also make sure that they fill out the zip grade answers as well. And the 7 questions on the exam sheet under the zip grade portion of the exam correspond to the 7 rows of bubbles on the zip grade. The event is out of 100 points, and unanswered questions are automatically marked wrong except the tiebreaker. If 2 teams correctly answer all tiebreaker questions, then the chromatogram quality determines the tiebreaker. So we'll get to chromatography in a bit, but it's also good to have your students be well versed in how to do chromatography. Again, I'll go through that in a bit. Materials that your students should bring to my event are as follows. So first, we need OSHA-approved goggles, splash-proof, because we're all about safety with this event. I'm a trained chemist too, and these materials that we use in the event, they're all found in our kitchen or in our bathroom first aid kit, but we just want to make sure that our students are safe, no splashes in the eyes, so both students have to have goggles. I will have some on hand, but please don't count on that, because once the extras are distributed, I won't have any more. Also, please bring 3 pencils or pens, um, and make sure your students have the appropriate amount of writing utensils, because again, if I run out of extras, it'll be harder to source more in a short period of time, and we just want to make sure that your students are prepared. 2 pencils, 1 can go to each student, and then the 3rd pencil can go towards chromatography. So that's why I say 3. Your students are also allowed to bring 1 2-sided index card or sheet of notes. So the maximum size is 8.5 by 11 inches, so like your printer paper. And as a note, this year in the rules, I've tightened what the students can bring in regarding the notes. So no sticky notes are allowed on this sheet. Um, they can only write front and back, and you can't put any other additional sheets. So like sheets that are stapled or taped on that can be flipped or folded up, because we just want to make sure it's fair for everyone. So please just have your students come in with a sheet, double-sided. They can write whatever they want. Your students are also allowed to bring 2 magnifying glasses maximum, so there can be 1 per student. And then just make sure your team knows your team number, because that'll help us seat them, and it will help the flow of the event so that we have enough time for everyone to complete the event and just stay on schedule. There are additional rules this year that were added. So the first one is that cell phone and smartwatch use are not permitted at any time of the event. So please have your students have their cell phones on silent or vibrate. They cannot bring them out during the exam. Better yet, it's good if they leave the cell phone with you or they put it in a bag that they bring to the event. Bags can be placed at the front or back of the room. They just cannot be by the team's event station. For smartwatches, um, it's in their best interest not to have them because it just makes things more level for everyone. We don't want people using timers on their smartwatches or trying to communicate. Not saying anyone has, but just in case. I will be providing a clock in case the clock provided in classrooms isn't accurate or is not working. Also, teams are not permitted to touch test materials unless instructed, and I will give clear verbal cues for that. So if your students sit down, they should not touch anything on the table. As I said before, personal belongings can be placed at the front or back of the room, such as water bottles, bags, but they can't be by the students during the event. Cheating is also not permitted at all, and some scenarios could be if they look at other teams' answers or if there are photos or videos taken of test materials or the event room. Um, that will not fly with this event. So if any of these rules are violated, it could lead to point deductions or disqualification because we just want to make sure everything's fair for everyone. Um, so please just relay this to your students just so there are no issues once we all get into the event room. Now, before I continue, are there any questions regarding this first portion with the event rules or I guess event background?
I have a question.
Sure.
Can the note sheet be typed or is it handwritten only?
It can be typed.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll move on to part one, which is powders. And the objective of part one with the powders is to identify the powders and match the cup of powder found at the crime scene to um, one or two of the cups of powder provided by the suspects. So from here on out, whatever evidence is labeled with a number is going to be the evidence found at the crime scene, and materials labeled with letters, so A through E, are from the suspects. So for the powders portion, you have to have your students match the powders in cup one to one or two of the suspect's powder cups. And there can be up to 3 powders in a cup. So for instance, cup A could perhaps have 2 powders, cup B could have 3 powders, cup C could have 2, so on and so forth. You won't have more than 3 powders mixed in one cup, whether it's the numbered cup or the lettered cup. And to identify these powders, the students will use the black paper, water, vinegar, iodine, the plastic cups, toothpicks, and wooden spoons that are given to them. And the idea is to take a small portion from each cup, either put it in an empty cup or on black paper using the spoon, and they will test it with the liquids as well as looking at the powder, both wet and dry, using the magnifying glasses. Please keep in mind that whatever powders they're given at the table, that's all they get. So if they use up all of, let's say, cup A, they can't ask for more because that's the only amount of powder allotted to them, whatever is at their table when they start. And as I said before, yeah, you use a spoon to put a small portion on either the black paper or the cup, and then you use the materials to study the powders when it's both wet and dry. They're able to ask for more of the black paper, the empty plastic cups, and the toothpicks, as well as the spoon. There will be ample amount of liquid in each of these bottles, but they can always ask for a different bottle or help opening the liquid bottles as well. There are 10 different kinds of powders, and there are forbidden or not allowed combinations of powders. So I will never give these two combinations of powders to your students. So the first combination is Alka-Seltzer, baking soda, and or calcium carbonate. Any combination of threes will not be seen on the test. Also, cornstarch and flour will not be combined together in a single cup for this event. So when you're practicing, just make sure that you keep these forbidden combinations in mind. They're forbidden or not allowed because they're too hard to tell apart when they're together. So we figured this out, and just to make things smoother for the event, we're not going to have these combinations. To get points for this portion of the test, first your students have to fill out the identity of each powder cup on the powder table. So we look at, let's say, cup one, they're going to circle whatever powders are in cup one. They're then going to circle the amount of powders or the identity of powders in cup A, so on and so forth. They also have to answer on the zip grade which suspect or suspects cup matches cup one for the powders. So make sure that they also bubble in whoever's powder cup matches cup one. Are there any questions about powders?
I have a question.
Okay.
Could you repeat the substances that won't be combined
Okay.
again? I got Alka-Seltzer, baking powder, and there was one more, right?
It's Alka-Seltzer, baking soda, and or calcium carbonate. And then the other combination that won't be seen is cornstarch and flour.
Okay.
Also, the PowerPoint will be available too, so you can look through on the Crime Busters event page, and this recording will also be available. So if you find you missed something during the presentation, you can always reference back.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions about powders? Okay, so we'll move on to chromatography with the ink samples. And the whole point of chromatography is to basically take, let's say, one substance and then put it into a liquid that will then separate that substance into its parts. So you'll see in a bit that, let's get there when we get there. So for now, the whole point of the chromatography section is to match the ink pattern in lane 2 on the chromatography paper to one or more of the ink patterns in lanes A through E. And keep in mind that your students will not have access to any extra chromatograms, so they only have one that they can work with that's given at the table, and they will turn in the chromatogram with the exam sheet. And in this case, ink sample 2 is the evidence found at the crime scene that they then have to match to one or two suspects' ink samples. So, as I mentioned before, the whole point of chromatography is to take one substance, put it into a liquid, and then you'll see that separation once the chromatography paper is in a liquid for a certain amount of time. Because ink is not made of one thing, it's made of a bunch of things that that can be dissolved at different rates in the rubbing alcohol. To separate the ink into its different components, the first thing the student should do is take that third pencil and gently push the pencil through the hole punch in the chromatography paper so that it's at the center of the pencil. After, they will take that pencil with the chromatography paper and lower it into the cup the ink lines that are on the chromatography paper should be above the surface level of the rubbing alcohol. If it's too low, then you're not going to get proper separation of the chromatography of the ink samples. You'll find that actually the rubbing alcohol will turn black or whatever color the ink is because the ink will just dissolve into the rubbing alcohol. So I emphasize that the ink line should be above the rubbing alcohol level and the paper should be centered on the pencil. Then the students will wait about 10 minutes. Have them not move the cup with the chromatography paper and pencil, and have them also monitor it to make sure that the ink lanes are rising at an even level. Straight, clean lanes and separation of ink per lane are the criteria I use to grade the chromatography papers, the chromatograms. So that's why it's good for them to monitor the setup closely and don't move it once it's set up. After that approximate 10 minutes, gently lift the pencil out of the cup and let it dry so that they're more able to see the similarities and differences between the different lanes. And before we move on, it may be a little hard to see, but I'm opening the floor to what you guys think matches ink sample number 2 on this sample chromatogram. So feel free to unmute and then let me know which sample you think matches ink sample number 2.
B.
Okay. What about other people?
Kind of looks like between B and E to me.
Okay. Any other answers? Okay. So in this case, B would be the correct answer because it's closer in shade to ink sample 2. E is close, but that's how close some of these ink samples can be in terms of shade. So that's why it's really important when you practice chromatography with your students. Use different black inks or just different different brands of the same ink color, because you'll see that in the beginning, all the inks will look black. But once you put it into the rubbing alcohol and that separation occurs, you'll get different shades, you'll get different colors even. Sometimes you won't even see a lane appear because the ink isn't dissolvable in the rubbing alcohol. So that's something to keep in mind. Good job for the answers, everyone. So to get points for the chromatography section, make sure that your student bubbles in whoever's ink samples match sample 2 on the chromatogram. And also make sure that they turn in the chromatogram. And we'll be giving labels to the students with their team number and school name, so it's easier to sort them when we grade them. But to get full points for this section, make sure they answer zip grade and turn in their chromatogram at the end. Are there any questions about chromatography?
Do you have any suggestions on what types of pens are best to practice with?
Really, I would go with, you can use any brand of pen. You can use pens you get for free. You can use Sharpie, gel pen, because the objective is to just see what the separation of the ink or no separation at all occurs once you put the ink in the rubbing alcohol using the chromatography paper. Any other questions? Okay, So we'll move on to the prints portion. And there are 3 different kinds of prints that the students will see in this event. There are fingerprints, footprints, and tire prints. Keep in mind that partial prints and obscured prints are possible when they're doing this event. And the objective is to match the prints found at the crime scene labeled prints 3, 4, and 5 to the appropriate suspect or suspects. And to do this, you will look at the prints in the stapled prints packet that they're given at their station using the magnifying glass to match the pattern found at the crime scene to the prints patterns that are given by the suspects. And to get points for the print section, you will have your students answer questions 3 through 5 on the zip grade. They won't get points if they don't bubble in the answers, so make sure that after they identify the suspect's prints belonging to the prints found at the crime scene, they bubble that in. They're also allowed to do whatever they want with the prints packet during the exam. So if they want to rip off certain pages, use the backside of pages of the prints packet because it's a single-sided packet. They're allowed to do so. They're able to write on it. They just can't take it out of the room. So are there any questions about prints? Okay, so I'll move on. Part 6 is the unspecified evidence. And this is, again, the wild card of the event. So meaning it varies year to year. It's not disclosed. The students will figure out what the unspecified evidence is at the event. Some examples can be quote unquote hair strands. So not actual human hair, but I've seen in the past string or yarn used that they can analyze. Also handwriting samples and pH tests. The objective of this portion of the test is to really tap into the students' creativity and out-of-box thinking and to have fun. And for getting points for the unspecified evidence portion of the events, they'll have to bubble in whoever's whoever suspects evidence matches the evidence found at the crime scene. So just make sure they bubble in that answer for question 6. Are there questions about unspecified evidence?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Will they be testing that unspecified evidence or just observing it with the magnifying glasses? Or do we know?
So it can be either.
Okay, so for example, like the pH testing, will they need to know how to do pH testing? Is that something we need to be training them on, or is that something that...
Yes, I would say that they should know the process of pH testing. If pH testing is the unspecified evidence for an event, there will be information, like background information, given above the actual, given with the unspecified evidence. So there will be information given that also explains what pH is, as well as how to identify, but it's good to practice that with your students as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions about unspecified evidence? Okay. And then part 7, arguably the most important part, it's identifying the criminal. And again, they can implicate 1 or 2 suspects. And to implicate 1 or 2 of the suspects, the students will use the number of times the suspect is chosen in the zip grade answers. If there's 1 suspect, that is implicated, that means that they have the most amount of zip grade answers. If there are 2 suspects implicated, then that means they have the same number of zip grade answers on the zip grade sheet. They have to answer question 7 to get points for the criminal identification portion. And just as an exercise, based on this zip grade sheet, who is implicated in this event?
A and C.
Okay. Other answers?
I agree.
Okay. So yes, A and C are both implicated because they each have 2 answers. So good job on that. It's good to go over this with your students too, so they can practice this portion of the test, because part 7 does have more weight in terms of points, because this is the point of the exercise to use evidence to come to a conclusion based on educated and vetted results. So just make sure that your student answers. This should be row 7 of the zip grade on their zip grade. Don't miss out on points. And I think this was just a duplicate. But there are more examples on this slide. So example 2, who is implicated on this zip grade sheet on the left?
C.
Only C.
Yeah, I would say
Any?
C. C.
Oh, yes. And what about example 3 on the right?
B.
Yes. So yeah, this is good practice. Good job, guys. Before I go on to tiebreakers, are there any questions about the criminal identification? Okay. So the tiebreaker question or questions are provided by me. And again, if 2 teams correctly answer all tiebreaker questions, the chromatogram quality will determine the tiebreaker. And tiebreaker questions will be related to forensics and let's say due process of looking at evidence. So in the past, we've had questions about, let's say, facts or trivia questions about fingerprints, about DNA. This is where you can get creative with your students about learning about forensics and forensic chemistry, forensic biology. So it's another way to tap into students' creativity and out-of-box thinking. After the students are finished, make sure that they have all questions answered on both the exam sheet as well as the zip grade, and make sure that they do the tiebreaker if they have time. Make sure the powders table is also complete, where they circle the identity of the powder for each cup, cup 1 as well as cup A through E. If they finish early, they can raise their hand and turn in the zip grade exam sheet and the chromatogram to me or the volunteers in the room. And like I said before, there is a label provided by us that they can put on the back of the chromatogram. If it hits the 30-minute mark, the students must stop working. I'll also give a verbal warning, hey, there's 5 minutes, there's 2 minutes, there's 1 minute before the event ends. And then I'll also tell them, okay, the event's done, pencils down, everyone. So they'll know when the 30-minute mark comes up. Some final notes for preparing make sure that you check out the Crime Busters website and that you practice with your students, because hands-on practice and knowing how to split up the portions of the exam between partners will make the event run smoothly for your students and better chance of getting more points and just overall enjoying the event. Make sure your students have all the materials before the tournaments, so their goggles, their pencils or pens, as well as their magnifying glasses and their note sheet. Make sure they all have that before entering my room. Also, make sure the students grab everything that they came in with. So make sure they don't forget anything before leaving the event room. I will turn in materials or like items found after the event to event headquarters, but it's just, easier if they have what they came in with on the way out. Use the note sheet to the student's advantage. So meaning um, whatever your students need help remembering, have it on the note sheet. It's there for you, so use up every square inch of that sheet of paper, both sides. And above everything else, have fun. These dates are not correct, so ignore that. I will change that for the presentation submitted on the website, John. And there are still quick start kits for Crime Busters that can be purchased. So just make sure that if you want a quick way to start practicing with your students, you'll be provided all the possible powders, the iodine, black paper, chromatography paper for the ink separation, as well as other items that can help you guys. You can find it on the Science Olympiad website. And I'm wondering if there's any other questions that you guys have about anything with this event.
I have one.
Okay,
Um, can you give an example or two of one of the tiebreaker questions?
so an example of a tiebreaker question could be, what is the definition of chromatography? Um, and that's fair game because they cover chromatography in this event. So that's where you can quiz your students on like different, let's say, definitions or like different concepts seen in the exam. Another example could be what one question I've seen in the past is, what are different forms of personal protective equipment that forensic scientists use at the crime scene? And they would list that out and they would get X amount of points per answer. So those are some examples of tiebreakers that your students can see.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For the kits, we have a few different things that you'll be able to find on our ordering system. There's a complete kit, which has all the supplies the starting team might need. In addition to powders, there's also magnifying glass, things like that, and droppers. There's also a replenishment kit, which is focused on more on the consumable portion of that kit. So you might have a kit from last year and just need to purchase the replenishment kit. We also sell the chromatography paper as a separate item if that's the one item that you're missing. So there's a few options, and they're available. Talk to your head coach to find out if they've already purchased one for you. And there's also discounts that we're offering depending on when you order. If you do it before January 15th, the maximum discounts available. And so if you haven't seen the instructions for how to order the kits, again, talk with your head coach.
Thank you, John. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending this event. I hope that you all stay warm and dry, especially with the weather from yesterday, and I look forward to seeing you guys this season. So, for now, have a good day.